Yo, what is going on? Thank you so much for joining in. So, Animorphs. You guys remember these books at all? I mean, I'm 99.1% sure that you do, because of the covers, man. They are just so iconic and memorable and a little bit traumatizing. I mean, look at these covers, man. In book number 1, we have a kid transforming into a lizard. Book number 2, we have a kid transforming into a cat. Number 3, into a bird. So you get the idea, right? And whatever that is. So, the Animorphs books, they're published by Scholastic, and if you watched my Goosebumps video I posted a few weeks ago, you would know that Scholastic is pushing out some new book covers for that series for Goosebumps, and guess what? They're doing the same thing for Animorphs as well. And just like the Goosebumps covers, I'm just not the biggest fan. I mean, we go from iconic covers like book number 1, for example, in Animorphs being this one, to the new covers being this one. Nope. It's just not doing it for me. Maybe it's just a little bit nostalgic, the original ones at least, to me. I mean, they definitely are, but maybe kids like these new ones. So it's been a very long time since I've even remotely thought of Animorphs, so I said, you know what, let's dive into some books from my past about kids transforming into animals. I mean, besides the animal morphing component of it, I have no idea what these stories are about, so I'm basically going into these books blind. I also could not remember if these books were like in sequential order or not, or if they're kind of like Goosebumps, where each book is like its self-contained story. So after a quick Google search, I found out a few things. Number 1 is that these books are definitely in sequential order, meaning that each book after the first one comes in order of the story. And number 2 being that there are many books in this series. And I'll let you take a guess at how many there are. 20? No. 30? Nope. Yeah, there are 54 books in this series. So if you thought there were a lot of books in the Wheel of Time series, well, Animorphs tops it. I mean, granted, there's only about 200 pages per book, or maybe a little bit less, but still, that's a lot of books. So with all that being said, I decided I wanted to check out these books again, so I dove into the first 3 books in the series to see if they live up to the iconic covers that have been stuck in my mind. So if you're ready, let's dive into it. So naturally, with any book series, you usually start with book number 1, which I did, which is called The Invasion. And looking at the cover as well, it looks like we have a pretty good idea of what to expect in terms of morphing. I mean, we have a kid transforming into a lizard. I mean, I think it's a lizard, right? So actually diving into the book, K.A. Applegate wastes no time at all getting you into some mighty morphin action straight away. And in the story, we're introduced to our main group of kids who are going to be our POVs throughout the story, being Marco, Tobias, Rachel, Casey, and Jake from State Farm. And in this first book, The Invasion, our main POV is from Jake's perspective. And in the story, this group of kids, they walk home together from school where they see something in the sky that does not look normal. Just look, Tobias said. His voice was strange, amazed sounding, but serious at the same time. So I looked up, and there it was. A brilliant blue, white light that scooted across the sky, going fast at first, too fast for it to be an airplane, then slower, then slower. What is it? Tobias shook his head. I don't know, I looked at Tobias, and he looked back at me. We both knew what we thought it was, but we didn't want to say it. Marco and Rachel would have laughed, we figured, but Casey blurted it right out. It's a flying saucer! So going back to the Goosebumps books real quick, in those books, R.L. Stine did a lot of what I like to call end of chapter jump scare cliffhangers. Well, K.A. Applegate follows the same approach in a lot of chapters within the Animorphs books, at least in the first 3 that I read. But maybe this is just common in kids' books. I mean, I don't remember, man, I'm sorry. But this is just something I noticed. So in the story, a spaceship lands right next to them, and the kids cannot be more nonchalant about it, as if this is an everyday occurrence. Well, what comes out of that spaceship would easily freak out any normal person. The kids kind of shrug and act like you've never seen a blue horse alien before. My first reaction was that someone had fused a person and a deer together. The creature had a head and shoulders and arms that were more or less what they should have been, though the skin was a pale shade of blue. But below that, he had fur, a mix of blue and tan, covering a 4-legged body that really did look like it belonged to a deer or maybe a small horse. He ducked his head out of the doorway, and I can see that even the fairly normal-looking parts of him weren't all that normal. For a start, he had no mouth, just 3 vertical slits, and then there were his eyes. 2 of them where they should have been, although they were a glittery green color. That was kind of shocking. But the real shock was his other eyes. He had what seemed like horns. Only the top of each horn was an eye. The horns can move, twisting to point the eyes front and back or up and down. So it's at this point in the story that we find out that this blue horse alien is actually a species of an alien called an Andalite, who lets the kids know that he is basically dying, and that there's other evil aliens on their way to enslave all mankind. So in his dying breaths, this Analyte entrusts a special technology to the group of kids, which allow them to, you guessed it, allow them to morph into whatever creature they last touched. He also gives them a quick overview of the rules of this whole morphing ordeal, with the most important one being that they should never stay morphed for more than 2 hours, or they will stay as that creature for eternity. So now that the kids have this power, it's up to them to save the world from these evil aliens, but not before our evil aliens make a special appearance and basically destroy this Analyte to pieces. I peeked over the wall again. I saw him held high in the air. I saw Mr. 3 open his monstrous gaping jaws. I saw the Analyte fall into that open mouth. The mouth closed. The teeth ripped the Analyte apart. And the Analyte Prince, Elfangor, Seniorol, Shamtul died. And at the very end he cried out. His cry of despair was in our heads. His cry will always be in our heads. I mean, a little bit metal, right? A creature being torn to pieces in a kid's book. So real quick, these evil aliens are not our simple big egghead green aliens. We have 2 varieties here that are both a little bit grotesque and a little bit spooky. The blade ship landed. A door opened. Casey started to scream, clamped my hand over her mouth. They leaped from the ship, whirling and thrusting and slicing the air. Creatures that looked like walking weapons. They stood on 2 bent back legs and 2 very long arms. On each arm there were curved horned blades growing out of the wrist and elbow. There were other blades at their bent back knees, 2 more blades at the end of their tails. They had feet like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but it was the head that got your attention. A neck like a snake, a mouth that was almost a falcon's beak, and from that forehead, 3 dagger-like horns raked forward. They were like massive centipedes, twice as long as a grown man, so big and round that if you tried to hug one, not that anyone would ever want to. They had a dozen legs that supported the lower 2/3 of their bodies. The top third was held upright, and their row of legs became smaller, with little lobster claw hands. So yeah, all this is like within the first 50 pages. We got giant crawling centipedes, warrior-like creatures with blades all over their bodies, similar to the Shrike from Hyperion. And again, the blue horse alien creatures that have scorpion tails. And the thing I haven't even talked about yet, the Yeerks are little slug-like creatures that crawl into your brain and take control of your body with you being fully aware. Oh yeah, the kids can morph into animals now too. So yeah, we're working up a lot here and I'm loving it. So the Analyte gets ripped to shreds, the kids make their escape, and they eventually get home because, you know what, they have school tomorrow. And from here, the kids end up meeting together a few times, trying to better understand this new power that they have, transforming into pretty normal animals like a cat or a dog. They also find out that whatever animal that they transform into, they also get the traits and qualities from that animal as well. For instance, when they morph into a dog, they have a better sense of smell. When they transform into a bird, they can see farther away. Or if they become a gorilla, they're really strong. And in the story, the kids find out that the little slug-like creatures called the Yeerks are slowly taking over people's minds in their town, including our main character's brother, Tom. So Tom, he's being really persistent on the group of kids joining him in this group called the Sharing, which sounds like a cult, but it's actually way worse than that. It's a way for the Yeerks to have a new pool of humans to enslave, but also have a pool of humans to control. The Sharing can do all kinds of things for you. Once you're a full member, how do you get to be a full member? I asked. He smiled mysteriously. Oh, that'll come later. First you become an associate member. Later, the leaders will decide whether to ask you to become a full member. Once you become a full member, the whole world changes. At that moment, something weird happened. I was looking at Tom, and he was smiling at me, but then his face kind of twitched. His head started to pull to one side, like he was trying to shake his head, only that he couldn't quite do it. For a split second, there was a look in his eyes, scared or something. He was looking right at me. It was like I was some different person. Some scared person was looking out of the same eyes. Then he was back to normal. Or what looked like normal. So you might be asking yourself, no one else saw these multiple spaceships land on Earth? No one else saw these Shrike-like creatures roaming the land? No. Earth and all the people who inhabit it are all in the palms of our Animorphs' hands. And back in the story, our kids find out that the Yeerks have a special meeting place underneath their school that has a huge pool that is full of nutrients that the Yeerks need to go back to every few days in order to continue mind controlling the people that they're inside. This is also the spot where they enslave and imprison hundreds and hundreds of humans, basically like cattle, to be used as future hosts for their mind control. There was a doorway where the wall had been. Strange smells and stranger sounds wafted up from inside the doorway. Chapman stepped through. There were stairs just inside, heading down into a purple-lit pit. From far away, as if it came from 100 miles down, I heard a faint sound. It was a scream of fear and despair. A human voice crying out in the darkness of that horrible place. No, the voice moaned. No. I knew what the scream meant. I knew what was happening. Somewhere down there, a human being was feeling the Yeerk slug slither inside his brain. Somewhere down there, a human being was being turned into a mindless slave. of the Yeerks. The Animorphs decide that they need to infiltrate and take on the Yeerks and save any humans that they can. So they head to their local zoo to basically gear up with different morphs of exotic animals like tigers, gorillas, elephants, and so on, so they can use it in a fight against the Yeerks. Our group, they make their way back to the Yeerk pool to basically save as many humans as they can, but basically they just stir the pot and basically just make the Yeerks angry where they have a little battle with the shark-like creatures and the centipedes. And also the leader of the Yeerks, Visser 3, is simply not having it, so he transforms into some crazy-looking beast. I compliment you on getting this far, but it will accomplish nothing, because now, my brave Analite warriors, it is time to die. He began to morph. I acquired this body on the 4th moon of the 2nd planet of a dying star. Like it? I realize I've been wrong to be hopeful. We were not going to make it. From Mr. 3's Analite body, the creature grew. Tall as a tree, towering over even Rachel. 8 massive legs, 8 long spindly arms, each ending in a 3-fingered claw. And from the place where the top set of arms grew came the heads. Heads, plural, 8 of them. This creature had a thing for the number 8. So in the end, they have this battle with the Yeerks, and they end up saving one person. But that person was not Tom, Jake's brother. Oh yeah, and one of our characters, Tobias, is stuck as a bird now. And this is really how the story ends, with them stirring the pot a little bit, saving one person, and now one of their crew members is basically stuck as a hawk. But they promise to continue fighting the Yeerks until one day the Analytes come back and help save planet Earth. Yeah, a lot happened in this book, but a lot of it was good. Lots of action, a little bit of humor intermixed, and overall I think it'd be a huge delight for any kid to read through, even though there were some brutal moments in there as well. And before we move on to book number 2, if you're enjoying the video so far, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and you might get something a little bit extra at the end of the video. Alright, so book number 2 in the Animorphs is called The Visitor. And you can see from the cover, we have a girl morphing into a cat. And unlike the first book, this one is from a different POV, from a different Animorph within our cast of characters, with that being Rachel, which I think is a really good idea for each book to have its own, unique voice, because it provides a little bit of a different perspective on the ongoing events. So this story, it starts off with all of our different Analytes flying around as different birds, where they decide that they need a new plan of action to take on the Yeerks, but then they start getting shot at by humans. Tobias' hawk let loose an intimidating shriek. My talons hit the gun barrel and closed on it. Tobias slashed the Ponytail guy's head with his own talons. Ponytail shouted in pain and surprise and loosened his grip on the rifle. Hey, the second guy shouted. Zoom! I was out of there with the rifle in my talons. With an additional weight of the rifle, it was a struggle getting any altitude. That bird has your gun, Chester. And the other one stole my beer. So our Animorphs decide the next best step is to infiltrate the principal's house because they know he's being controlled by a Yeerk in order to hopefully learn more about what they can do in order to take on these evil aliens. Rachel, who used to be a really good friend with the principal's daughter, thinks maybe it's a good time to rekindle that friendship in hopes that it'll open a door to the principal's house. Literally. So what we have here is a classic reconnaissance story where Rachel decides it's a good idea to transform into the principal's family's cat in order to waltz around the house unbeknownst to the family. Also, you gotta remember that they can't willy-nilly transform into any creature that they want to. They have to collect or bond with the animal's DNA before they can actually morph into that version of the animal. So in order to become the principal's cat, they gotta catch the cat, which they employ a variety of strategies, becoming a shrew, enticing the cat to chase them. And I'll be honest here, I had no idea what a shrew was, but basically it's like a mouse. Eventually, they do catch the cat, and this is where I gotta talk about K.A. Applegate putting a lot of emphasis on the actual morphing process in terms of their bodies slowly transforming body part by body part with grotesque transitionary stages and bone-crunching descriptions. There was a slight grinding noise as my backbone collapsed into a size smaller than my little finger. There was a disturbing, not quite pain sensation that goes along with some morphs. Like you knew it should hurt, but it didn't quite. I could feel the tail sprout from my tailbone. A long, hairless tail, not at all attractive. Now, as a cat, Rachel eventually gets into the house and navigates to a room where she finds that the principal is talking with Visser 3 through a hologram projection. We also get some very visual imagery here where Visser 3 puts Chapman, or the Yeerk inside Chapman, in his place by some strange method of intimidation, letting him know that he is a big boss here and he's not to be played with. The hologram Visser lowered the tube mouth towards Chapman's head. The mouth opened, revealing hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny suckers, each dripping slime. It seemed as if the tube mouth closed over Chapman's head. Chapman shook and quivered in terror. This is also where we get into a little bit more of the mature and darker elements found within the story, where Rachel sees firsthand the destruction that the Yeerks are causing from a family's perspective, with it being more psychological. People's minds are literally put in the back seat while the slug-like creatures, the Yeerks, are steering the ship, controlling any decisions that they want to, with them being fully aware, not being able to do anything about it. Obviously, families are affected by this, as the Yeerks are controlling the parents and sometimes even the kids, with the prime example being Melissa, who is the principal's daughter. Melissa, she can feel that her parents are different in some way, while they're not expressing any signs of love or any acts of love either, putting her in a depressed and lonely state. I mean, this makes complete sense. If your parents suddenly stop loving you, stop taking an interest in you, of course this would destroy you as a kid. I mean, heck, even as an adult. Next time Marco asked why we're fighting the Yeerks, I knew I would have a whole new answer. Because they destroyed the love of parents for their daughter. Because they made Melissa Chapman cry in her bed with no one to comfort her but a cat. It was a small answer, I guess. I mean, it wasn't some high-sounding answer about the entire human race. It was just about this one girl, my friend, whose heart was broken because her parents were no longer her parents. So Rachel, she does learn some very interesting stuff, where she listens in on a conversation with Mr. 3 and the Yeerk controlling Chapman's body. But she does not learn where the new Yeerk pool is, so she decides, it's best to infiltrate the house again. But only on the day that the group does not have any homework. Honestly, I think it's hilarious where the kids put saving the world on hold because they gotta do some homework. Eventually, Rachel makes it back into the house, but she is busted. She is caught by Chapman, who again is controlled by a Yeerk, and Mr. 3 tells him to bring her to his ship.
Bring her to me.
We also learn that Jake morphed into a flea and is attached to Rachel's cat body, so he's along for the ride too. So Chapman, he brings Rachel, and in turn Jake as well, to Visser 3, where the human inside the principal's body resists the Yeerk's control, giving Rachel and Jake a moment to break free and fight. It was all over. I knew I was done for. Nothing in the world could stop the beast Visser 3 had morphed into. He was 20 feet tall, as tall as a telephone pole. He stood in 3 massive legs, each as big as around as a redwood tree. He had a tiny head, not much bigger than a human's head. He would have looked funny, except there was nothing funny about what he was doing. With 2 long, mighty arms, he casually was tearing up the concrete. He slammed his fingers into the cement. He ripped it up in slabs and tossed them over his shoulder. One of the slabs hit Hork-Bajir and crushed him. I don't think Mr. 3 even noticed or cared. I ran. Crash! One of the Visser 3 huge hands slammed down in front of me. So the Animorphs, they escape the clutches of Visser 3's hands again, with them flying off into the horizon. Not really doing too much besides annoying the Yeerks again, but they do destroy one of the tiny spaceships though. And this is where Book 2 ends, with them poking the Yeerk bear a little more, leaving you again with the hope that the Blue Horse Scorpion Tail aliens make their way to Earth, hopefully to save them here pretty soon. Alright, the last book that I read was book number 3, with that one being The Encounter, and as you can see in the cover, we have a boy morphing into a bird. And you might remember from the first book, I said that one of the boys, Tobias, is stuck as a bird. I mean, are we even going to acknowledge that this kid is stuck as a bird? I don't know how long it's been between books, 1 and 3. But you would think that there would be some, parents out really worried about where their boy is. That question is somewhat answered throughout the story. And in book number 1, we had Jake as our main POV. Book number 2 was Rachel as our main POV. This one, we actually are in the POV of Tobias, the bird boy. So this story starts off with Tobias and a few others flying around, where Tobias talks about what it's like being a full-time bird. We also talk about how Tobias is slowly losing himself to the animalistic nature of the bird, which is very concerning because Tobias may no longer be Tobias, he'll be Bird Bias.
Got him!
So in the story, Tobias and Rachel decide that they need to save a bird who is being used as a mascot at a car dealership where a commercial is being filmed. And they were not that sneaky about it. Rachel, I cried silently in my mind. Rachel, now would be a good time. Sorry, I missed the first bus, I just got here. Her voice was in my head. We call it thought speak. It's something we can do when we morph. I breathed a sigh of relief. Help is on the way. Hurrah! What in the world was... The mechanic cried. I knew what it was. It was Rachel. Pretty blonde Rachel. Although right at the moment she wasn't pretty. Impressive, but not pretty. Boom. Crunch. Oh my lord. Dylan Dan gasped. Forget the bird, there's an elephant stomping over the convertibles. I would have smiled if I had a mouth. I finished turning the lock. I yanked open the cage door. The hawk was wary. She was a true hawk, with only a hawk's mind and instincts to guide her. But she did know an open path to the sky when she saw one. Out she came in a rush of gray and brown and white feathers. So on the way back home, Tobias notices something up in the clouds, but doesn't think too much of it until he sees a flock of geese literally smash into it as if they were smashing into a building.
Come on then.
And this is when we find out that the Yeerks have a floating spaceship up in the clouds, which is basically cloaked under a invisibility shield. So the whole group, they all decide to morph into wolves, besides Tobias, to go check out what the heck this ship is doing. Where they find out that the ship descends to Earth every few days and sucks up a bunch of water from a lake. And just like in the first 2 books, we get some more very descriptive imagery of the whole morphing process that I feel could be in a horror film. Still, as the wolf snout began to push from her face, it was not a pleasant sight. Her ears grew furry and pointed. Then they slid straight up the side of her head until they almost touched the top. Her eyes went from a brown-black to a golden brown. All over her body, the fur replaced the bright pinks and greens of her leotard. A tail suddenly shot out from behind. I can hear the grinding of her bones as they rearranged. Her upper arms shortened, her lower arms grew longer, fingers shriveled and disappeared, leaving behind only stubby black nails. There was a sickening crunch as her knees changed direction. Her legs shrank and thinned and grew fur. Suddenly, she fell forward, no longer to stand erect. It had taken about 2 minutes. Casey was now a wolf. The team, they take a few days to decide what to do next, but we do get some really good inner dialogue from Tobias, where he's constantly struggling with being trapped inside of a hawk's body, where the hawk is slowly coming in more and more control, until he is snapped out of it by remembering the impending doom coming to Earth from the Yeerks, the Shrikes, and the centipede aliens slowly growing stronger and stronger. But I couldn't fight it anymore. The hawk had won. I had killed and eaten, and I had loved it. The ecstasy of the hunt. Ecstasy. In a second, it would all be over. One more stroke of my powerful wings in the glass. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar face on the upper level. Suddenly, something shot past me, small, white, stitched. Crash! The baseball hit the glass just inches ahead of my beak. Just where Marco had aimed it, glass shards fell around me. I shot through the hole. Sky. The hawk flew fast and straight. I let it go. I surrendered. Tobias, a boy whose face I can no longer remember, no longer existed. So with the team back together, they devise a plan to all morph into fishes so that they can be sucked up into the Yeerk spaceship whenever they come and get some more water. So hopefully, they can turn off the cloaking device to the spaceship, pulling the sheet off the evil aliens so that all humans can see the threat and hopefully help out. Excuse me, Marco said, but has anyone else ever stopped to realize some of the things that we talk about are totally insane? What, turning into a fish so we can be carried by a hawk and let ourselves be sucked up the pipe of an alien spaceship so that we can turn into tigers and gorillas and whatever and overpower the creepy aliens, Rachel said. Is that what you mean by insane? That's it exactly. Yep, Rachel said. It's insane. Well, okay, Marco said. As long as we know we're all nuts. Let's do it. So they go about this plan, not really scouting the ship at all. I mean, who knows where these water pipes end up? I mean, they can go to like a meat grinder or like a boiler room. But you know what? Let's just go and find out. And at this point in the story, I was actually surprised that the story did not go in the way that I was anticipating. I really thought the kids are going to be sucked up in the pipe, get into the ship, turn into some beastly creature, wreak havoc on the ship, turn off the cloaking device, but that did not happen. So the kids, they did end up going up the pipe, but they were stuck. Like literally stuck, they had nowhere to go within this container. So to save the day, Tobias, is a bird, steals a beam gun from one of the aliens, flies up to the cockpit of the ship, shoots the alien that's controlling the ship, and destroys all the control panels as well, making the ship crash down to Earth and blow up. I was there. Below me, transparent plastic. I could see the crew in the bridge, Taxon staring wildly up at me. With one desperate lunge, I propelled myself into the air. I had to fly full force to stay ahead of the onrushing windows of the bridge. Then, with one sharp talon, I pulled the trigger on the Draken beam. Fry, you worms! There was no recoil. Not like a regular gun at all, but a beam of intense red light lanced from me to the bridge. It burned a hole through the window, sliced through a fat Taxon, and began slicing up the control panels and instruments like a hot knife going through butter. I squeezed that trigger for as long as I could. At last, exhausted, I could do no more. The Draken beam slipped from my talons and plunged towards the earth below. But I had done it. And the rest of the Animorphs, they were able to escape before the ship blew up, flying away as birds, ending our third Animorphs book. And in the story, besides being a thorn in Visser 3's foot, they actually do some damage here, which is very cool to see. But besides that, Bird Bias is still a bird. The aliens are still very much present, and hundreds of aliens are still under Yeerk control, setting up many books to come. Just picturing a bird holding a death ray is just something that's super comical to me, and something that I would not predict in a book at all. For you guys watching, do you guys remember any of this in the books? I must have blacked out as a kid because I don't remember any of these stories, and all felt really fresh to me. Overall though, I had a great time revisiting these Animorphs books, and was pleasantly surprised to see how much fun the stories were, intermixed with some really mature themes too. As a kid, I can definitely see these books checking all the boxes for me for what makes a entertaining, fun read, hopefully sparking me to read even more. Will I continue reading the 51 books remaining in the series? Probably not. Remember birds holding death rays, taking down galactic ships? Absolutely. Comment down below if you remember reading these books as a kid, or what's a series that got you into reading. And for sticking around this long, you've earned 1 XP token, and if you're already a subscriber, you get an extra XP token, so congratulations. Have a good one, keep reading, peace.